boundaries are an interesting thing. A lot of people mistake what they are and think, so I want to kind of dig into that because I think that's super important. And I did a whole episode on that. And boundaries are not ultimatums. They are not a way to make other people change. They are a way for other people to know if you do X, this is going to be my response. That's it. You are simply telling people what you are going to do. You don't tell other people what to do. You say, if you come into my office and you start yelling at me, I'm going to get up and I'm going to leave. If you can come into my office and talk to me in a civil manner, then I'm going to stay. That's it. And it's not about making the other person change. It's just letting them know if you do this, this will be the response. And it's very simple like that. And I think a lot of people have a hard time with that. They're like, oh, I'm setting a boundary. It's like, no, you're trying to manipulate the other person. You're trying to make them do something because you don't like what they're doing. So you're calling it a boundary, but it's really an ultimatum. It's saying, you better stop doing this or else I'm going to.
Welcome to the EQ Gangster podcast, where you will learn practical tools to grow your mental and emotional health and intelligence to be the best version of yourself, both at work and at home. It is real, raw, and transformational. The journey of emotional growth isn't easy, but it's worth it. I believe in you. EQ Gangsters, it is so good to see you all. I'm super stoked to introduce you all to Mr. Erick Cloward, and he is a podcast host. He is a high-speed, low-drag, air-cooled, belt-fed, Teflon-coated former corporate executive, and now has this fascinating lifestyle that he's doing. And he is the first guy out of 400 some episodes that I've done to share the Stoic philosophy. I've never interviewed anybody yet on my podcast about the Stoic philosophy, and that's his kind of area of expertise. So I'm really excited to share Erick and his thoughts and insights with you all. Erick, without further ado, brother, please introduce yourself.
So, hello, everybody. My name is Erick Cloward. I am the host of the Stoic Coffee Break podcast. It's been running for a little over 6 years now, on and off. I did take some time off throughout that, trying out different things, but always coming back to it because it's one of those things. I call it my public therapy because I talk a lot about my own personal life. I've been through a lot in my life, a lot of shit that I've worked through, and the times when I took off, I found that I would learn these great lessons and I would just have to sit down and write them down. And then I would be like, crap, this is so good. I need to share this with other people. And so then I would come back to it and then I'd be like, no. This is taking a lot of time. I'm going to take another break and then I'm going to go work on this thing. I was working on music. I'm also a musician as well. And uh, having been a software developer and CTO for 24 years, I'm very interested in programming and so on. So for a while, I was working on learning Unreal Engine, but uh, really found that the reason that I took that break under the guise of learning Unreal Engine, I was really struggling with some depression. My primary relationship was on the rocks, and I ended up playing video games the whole time. So then I learned some more good lessons and then came back to the podcast and I've been going strong ever since. I think that was about maybe 2 years ago, year and a half ago. I think more like 2 years ago. But anyway, so that's kind of, I know, a little bit of a tangent there. Like I said, I was a software developer and CTO for 24 years. And last year, my life everything kind of fell apart in a lot of different ways. So, like I said, my primary relationship ended. It was a 10-year relationship. My kids are grown up and moved out of the house. I lost my job a year ago, and it was at the point where Google, Facebook, a bunch of other companies just flooded the market with software developers, and I applied for probably about 70 or 80 different jobs, and I got one callback, did one interview. That was it. And I've been doing this for a long time. I'm good at what I do, but the market was just really not there. So I decided that I was going to sell my house. And since I didn't need it anymore, because it was a giant house, it was a 6-bedroom house, and there was basically me and my partner, ex-partner in there for a while. And then she moved out this last summer, and then I sold it this last fall and moved to Amsterdam. Right now, I'm currently in Berlin, kind of visiting the city, checking things out. And yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at right now. What I'm working on now, and this is how I actually met Noble. We are in a course together about how to build masterminds and uh, coaching programs. And what I'm working on is developing a coaching program for teams to build better cohesive teams that function at a very high level and also low stress and are able to help and support each other. Because having worked on so many different teams, the places that I worked that I loved working at the best and where we got the most done were those that had good leadership, had a blameless culture, and just made it so that work was something that was really enjoyable, even if you didn't really care for the project you were working on, or the actual work that you were doing might have been boring or somewhat redundant. If you're with the right people, you have the right kind of team and the right kind of leadership, then you're willing to put up with kind of doing some scut work for a while or things that aren't really as much fun because you really enjoy the environment you're working in. And as any business owner will tell you, turnover is expensive. That institutional knowledge that your people gain, especially in software development, the knowledge that they have in their head about all of these projects and how their systems works and everything like that, that is that is worth a year's salary right there. So anytime that you have to bring on somebody else, you basically have lost about 6 months of productivity, and then another 6 months of probably about 75% productivity. And then finally by the year, your new developer is back up and running and is able to, basically pick up the slack of where they were, simply because software development, at least, the software development I was working on wasn't something you could just switch out parts, switch out developers super easy, because they're very complicated and very complex systems. So that's what I'm working on right now, is helping teams to run like a tribe. Because when you have a tribe, you have each other's back, you work with each other's weaknesses and strengths, and it just makes work so much more enjoyable to be around, and you are significantly more productive and just have a lot more fun overall.
Love it. And totally agree, by the way. Totally agree. Thank you for sharing all your background there, Eric. That was great. And and I'm sure, well, so there, and there were definitely some ups in that story, and there were definitely some downs in that story. And so again, thank you for your vulnerability. What so let's do this. What is Stoic philosophy, and how did you get introduced to it?
So, Stoic philosophy is obviously an ancient philosophy that was started back around 2000 years ago in Athens. And the way that it came about was there was this guy named Zeno of Citium, and he was a merchant. He was on a ship to Athens, and he had all of his wares that he was selling, and he was doing pretty well. And then he hit a shipwreck and basically lost everything out. He washed up to shore in Athens, so basically had nothing at that point, and was wandering around Athens trying to figure out what to do next. And during that time, he frequented a bookseller and he stumbled upon the biographies of Xenophon. And Xenophon was a Greek general. He was very, and historian, a very smart guy. And he wrote about Socrates and some of the other philosophers and everything in this book. And Zeno was so taken by Socrates that he went to the bookseller and said, "Hey, who can I talk to that can teach me this stuff? This stuff is amazing. These are things that I wish that I would have known. And how do I become this kind of person? And who can teach me to become this kind of person?" And just at that moment, Crates the cynic came, or Crates of Thebes came walking by. He was a cynic philosopher, and the bookseller pointed out and said, "There's your guy." So he went out there, he met Crates and became his pupil. And the Cynics were kind of an offshoot of kind of the Socratic lineage of philosophy. So when Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and so the Cynics were kind of in that same realm. And as learned more about philosophy, learned more about the philosophers that came before him, came up with this idea of Stoicism, building upon these foundations from the Socratic method and the Socratic philosophers, which again are Plato and Aristotle. So he took the four virtues that Aristotle put out, which are courage, wisdom, justice, and temperance, which is also defined as self-discipline. And so Stoicism falls in line in what are called kind of like virtue ethics, meaning the idea that the Stoics believe that there's the only good in this world, the only things that you can strive for that are actually good for you 100% and cause no damage at all are those four virtues. And so as he built up this philosophy and came up with these ideas, he took those from Aristotle and Plato, and Aristotle, kind of his big different thing was he agreed with those four virtues, but he also felt that health, wealth, and fame, and good looks, aesthetics were also important for developing virtue. And Zeno was like, no, you don't need any of those things to develop virtue. He's like, you can be poor and be a virtuous person. You can be the ugliest person in the world and be a virtuous person. You can be chronically ill and be a virtuous person. None of those things matter. The only good is that you work on your wisdom, you work on your courage, you work on your justice, and you work on your temperance. And the other thing that's so great about those four virtues is that they're self-reinforcing. So you need to be wise in order to be courageous, because if you're too foolhardy, then you're going to get yourself killed. If you're not courageous enough, then you're a coward and you don't actually step up and do what you need to do. But in order to gain wisdom, you have to have courage. You have to go out and try things. You have to go make mistakes. You have to get experience. So courage is needed to gain wisdom. You need wisdom in order to practice justice. And justice we could define as how you treat other people in a very simple, broad stroke sort of way. It's not just about laws. It's about how do you treat other people? How do you interact with humanity? You try to act justly, and you have to have courageous to step up and be just. And when people are saying, "Hey, we need to, you know, kill anybody who's not like us," and you step up and go, "No, that's a bad idea. We shouldn't do that." That takes courage to do that, but also takes wisdom in how to apply justice. And self-discipline is the thing that kind of wraps them up together, that temperance. I mean, you need to know how to balance your life. You need to be able to, not overwork yourself, but also not be lazy. You need to be able to, again, temperance is what helps us decide when it's good to be courageous and when it's good to withdraw. And so it's about, so in a nutshell, I guess probably the other things that are important about Stoicism is that it's a philosophy that is about how to live a good life. And that's really its whole purpose and aim. And the reason it has the name Stoicism was that, and when Zeno was learning this, he would go out onto this thing called the Stoiopoioka, which is a Greek word for the painted porch, which was in the Acropolis in Athens. And he would go out there and he would stand up there and he'd just start talking about his philosophy, and people would come along the street and then they'd listen to what he'd have to say, and then they'd ask him questions and they start discussing these things. So in a nutshell, I mean, Stoicism is the porch philosophy, the painted porch philosophy. That's really where it came from. And I guess probably the last and most important thing to understand about Stoicism is that one of its main tenets is that you need to understand what you have control over and what you do not have control over. And that most of your stress in life is trying to control things that you can't and not doing the things that you can. And there's really only a few things that you have absolute control over. And that is your perceptions and your thinking and the choices and actions you take. That's it. You don't even have control over your own body, because you will get cancer. You didn't want cancer. You just got cancer. Now, what you can do is you can decide how you want to respond to that. You can choose your actions and your choices to that. So we can't control what happens to us in life. So those are all circumstances or things that they call externals, but we can control how we respond or react to those things. And Stoicism is very much about making sure that you are not highly reactive to things, that you take a moment, that you're able to kind of pause when things are getting rough or things are getting scary, things are getting overwhelming, and take a beat and go, what would be the best thing to do in this situation? What would be the thing that would be the lead to the optimal outcome? And that's oftentimes why the term Stoic means somebody who doesn't have emotions, or it seems that way. And the original Stoic, and it's not it's not wrong, but it is wrong at the same time. So the Stoics weren't about not feeling emotions. It was about feel that emotion, but don't make your decision based on that emotion. And so somebody who is a Stoic doesn't react like most people do. So when something goes wrong, some people lose their shit, they go crazy, they start screaming and yelling. And so everybody thinks, oh, that's the way you're supposed to respond. In a Stoic, when something goes wrong, they go, well, crap. What's this really sucks. I feel that. What am I going to do about it? And they take that beat and they make a choice rather than just reacting to it. And so that's where the term stoic came from. It's because the Stoics wouldn't get riled up about things. They'd just be like, well, that's interesting. What am I going to do about it?
Fascinating. Wow. Thank you for laying out the history. That was so fascinating to hear the history of Stoicism. That is fascinating. So, the good and bad thing about this is that the reason I started podcasting is, like you said, the public therapy or whatever you however you use that phrase.
Yeah.
For me, it's very much therapy as well. But selfishly, I interview the people that I think could help me, right, and add value, right. So there's definitely some selfishness for sure, and hopefully, well, I know a lot of folks get benefit from hearing from our speakers as well. Um, that is so fascinating. So, okay, there are a couple things. So my perch perspective is I'm in the emotional intelligence world. That's where I've been the last 4 or 5 years, very, very intentionally working on my own EQ every single day and helping out other leaders and executives and entrepreneurs and stuff and military. A lot of things that you said, Erick, if from my perspective, I want to hear your response to an observation, because yeah, it would be helpful. A lot of stuff that you said about stoicism, the four virtues and all those, the virtue ethics and stuff. And I'm filtering that through my grid of my own development. I don't know that I would have been very good at those four virtues prior to me starting to grow my own self-awareness. So, how does the concept of self-awareness fit into the Stoic philosophy?
Well, that's very much what wisdom is about. So, wisdom and control, I think for me, I look at are the two key elements of self awareness. Because a big point of self awareness is understanding what you have control over and what you don't have control over. Because most of our stress comes from trying to control things we can't. Usually that's other people. That's the situation we're in. That's, our job at work that we may not like what we're doing and we try to exert some kind of control over those things. And because we're trying to control things that we oftentimes don't have control over and wishing that things were different and bemoaning the fact that these things happen to us and our life would be so much better if this didn't happen or that didn't happen. But the thing is recognizing that there are things that you just couldn't control and that you can't control is very freeing. And you just you learn to let that go. Like for example, there was a gal that I dated a bit before I moved to Amsterdam, and I was talking with her. I said, why is it so easy to be around you? Why is it so? Whereas my last relationship, while it was great in a lot of ways, it was very frustrating at the end, and there was a lot of anger, a lot of fighting, and it was really, and I was just like, I don't understand, and so for a long time I thought there was something broken with me in particular. I mean, yes, there is for sure, but I thought that I was like irretrievably broken and that I would never be able to have a good relationship with anybody again. And yet I was in this relationship and it was comfortable. I felt like I could just relax and be myself. And I was like, so what is it about our dynamic that works? Because I'm really trying to understand this because this is good. And I want to make sure that in any other future relationships I have that I'm able to do this. And this gal smiled. She's a good friend of mine now. And she just said, it's because I don't want anything from you other than for you to be exactly who you are. I don't want to change you. And for me, that was just like this, oh, oh yeah, she's not trying to change me. She doesn't expect me to be anything other than I am. And she's like, I have to, in every relationship that I'm in, she's like, I approach it with this idea that this person is going to be exactly who they are right now. And I have to be okay with the fact that this is who they could be for the rest of their life. And if I don't like that, then I need to do something myself. I can't change this other person. It's up to them to change. I can make a request. I could say, hey, you know what? When you do this, this doesn't work for me. Can you do this instead? But she's like, but they can say no. And I have to learn to accept that. And that right there was a big giant lesson for me. I'm like, oh crap. eh, I think me and my previous partner tried to control each other in a lot of ways, and it wasn't very healthy for either of us. And so from that right there was just a big glaring example of, hey, this is something you can't control. You can't control other people. So you have to learn to accept them for exactly who they are and just assume that they're going to remain the same, not be regardless of how much you might want them to change, or you might know how they should change that would make them better and would make their lives so much easier. But it's their choice and you can't control them. And that right there is one of the biggest things that causes us so much stress, is that we're trying to control things we can't. So that big self-awareness is really, really important. And wisdom comes from self-awareness, because if you aren't able to take the time to understand your own thinking, to be alone with your thoughts and know what's going on inside your head, your thoughts are the things that cause your emotions. And if you are unaware of your thinking, if you are unaware of the yammering that's going on inside your mind, then you're probably not going to be very in tune with your emotions either, because you might be feeling all of these things but not understand, why am I feeling these things? But when you can take a step back and look at the thoughts that are going on inside your head, are the things you're ruminating on? Are you blaming yourself for something? Are you misinterpreting a situation? You know, understanding the thinking behind that and being able to take a step back and look at that. And that's why meditation is such a huge, huge component of Stoicism. They talk about that a lot, is being aware of your own thoughts, being alone with yourself. There was a quote by Seneca that said, there's no something like, there's no better way to tell the character of a man who can sit and be completely comfortable in his own company. That he's okay with his thinking, understanding his thinking and stuff like that. And I think that so many people are just too busy reacting emotion to emotion to emotion to emotion, and not taking that time to just be alone with their thoughts and go, all right, what's really going on inside my head? I have this emotion. What's all the thinking behind it? And a lot of that thinking is a mixture of your own perspective on the situation. So the story that you're telling yourself about this situation, how that person is such an asshole because they said this, and I can't believe they would do that, and blah blah blah. And it's all of that story that you're making around it. Some of it is your memories or your past experiences, which influence that, because you're comparing that person to how other people reacted in the past, how you think you should be treated, so on. Um, and it's some of it is also just purely biological. I mean, when somebody does something that startles you or stress, that creates that kind of fear, fight or flight response, that also triggers some emotions, because that's your body's way of getting a shortcut of going, hey, this is dangerous, you need to be aware, and it so pumps that up. And we have all kinds of these autonomic response, not autonomic, but automatic responses to things that are either things that, based on past experiences, our brains have put up little tripwires so that, oh, that goes off, okay, wow, you better protect yourself. And for me, I grew up in a fairly violent home, and so there were a lot of those for me, for sure. A lot of things that definitely triggered me off, where um, I would be upset about something and I would think it's this thing, and I'd be so angry about it. And then later on, I'd look back and I'm like, why did I get so angry about that? That doesn't make any sense. It was just this, and not really understanding why I was angry. I mean, that's really what ended my first marriage, was that we get in these arguments, and then halfway through, I wouldn't understand what I was really arguing about. I just felt so angry about something. And so much of it was these trauma responses that I'd grown up with. And so it took a lot of time, and it's still taking time to work through those to the point where when those things happen, I can get that, I can get that half second and go, okay, I'm going to take a breather. I'm going to stop this right now. Not stop the emotion, but just recognize the emotion, sit with that, and then make a wise choice after I've been able to either cool that down or recognize that I can put this on hold for a second, make a good decision, get out of here, then cool it down. And so that's where I think that Stoicism has been just an absolute game changer for me.
That's awesome. Great, great thoughts and great insights, Erick. I'm just determining which direction we go. Okay, because I've got this happens every time I get a traffic jam of questions. Right, I got 10 questions about this I want to ask, 5 questions about this, 8 questions about that. Let's go this direction. How how do you apply some of those great Stoic principles to high performing teams?
So, one of the other things that I really appreciate about Stoicism is that there's this great quote in there, and it said, when you stop blaming others for your situation, you're making progress. When or it's like you are not making mistakes at that point. If you blame yourself, you're making some progress. But when you don't blame anybody, you are wise. And when I first heard that, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, if something goes wrong, somebody's to blame, and one of the things that I really like to talk about with people who are working on teams like that is developing what is called the blameless team or the blameless culture. And what that means is that the only reason that we try to place blame on something is that blame is simply a missed expectation, meaning we thought something should go this way and it went that way. And so it was simply an expectation we had, and it didn't work out the way that we thought it should. So when we talk about somebody, making a mistake or other things like that, sure, you can look at it that way. But if you spend all this time blaming other people and other things like that, what you're doing is you're comparing them against the perfect. This is how it should have been going. And nobody's ever perfect. And so the Stoics have, they have this term called amor fati. And what that means is to love your fate. So amor, to love, and fate, fati. Um, and what they mean by that is that life happens, the universe happens, everything happens, and you can either love it or hate it. But you know what? The universe doesn't give a shit. It doesn't care if you love it or hate it. Life happens, and your response to it doesn't make a difference to whether or not it's going to happen. And so you can either learn to love what's going to happen or you can hate it, but either way, it's still going to happen. And so by learning to love everything that happens, being able to laugh off the absurdity of life and the things that happen, just make your life so much easier because then you're not stressing about all these things that happen. And that's where the idea of control also comes in. By recognizing what you have control over, you step up and take responsibility for those things and you move into that, and then you let go of everything else. And amor fati is very much that same way. So getting back on this idea of blaming things, I've seen teams where a good example of this. I had a friend who worked for Nike, and he would set up servers and networking and other stuff like that. And one day his boss was like, "Hey, you need to go work on this thing," and he was, and it was like putting a lot of stress on me. You need to get this done by this time, and it was like really just go go go. And he was just like, and so he got on there and he was working on this configuration for it, and he made a mistake on it and saved the file, and then the server rebooted, and in doing so it took down Nike's POS system for 4 hours. And he was just like, oh crap. And so worked an extra, worked late until the night getting everything restored, getting it all done. and came home and he was just absolutely stressed out. And he's just like, I know I'm going to be losing my job tomorrow. And he did. They like, you made that mistake, you're out. Rather than looking at this as an opportunity to go, hey, there's something wrong with our system. The fact that we could take down our POS system just by saving one single file, that's a giant hole in our system. And this guy's the expert because he's the one who actually did it. So he knows how it happened. So let's go ask him because he's the subject matter expert on how to take down our servers with one single file. And so they let him go, and it was really stressful for him, and I felt bad for him. But I saw that as a failure of leadership because that was a situation where they had a big chance to learn and to improve their process. And so, like on a software team, if somebody checks in a bug and it gets reviewed and it goes through QA and it gets deployed to production, that's a failure of the system. That's not just a failure of that one developer. That one developer didn't maliciously put that in there. His job is to make good code. And so it wasn't a malicious thing. So blaming him for it seems ridiculous. It seems like a waste of time and a waste of energy because the whole process failed to catch that. So now this guy is the expert at how that bug got introduced, and everybody else can help figure out why their process let that happen, why it didn't catch that. Was there just an error in thinking? It was just, oh, you know what? I thought this bit of code was going to do this. I forgot to write a test for it, and it didn't. So it didn't do what I thought it was going to do. Is it that our deployment process doesn't have enough automated testing built into it to catch some of these things? There are all of these things that we learn from that. And I like to say there are no problems. There are only choices. Nothing is ever a problem. It is simply a choice, an opportunity to make a choice. And that's one of the key things about Stoicism is your perspective is everything. It's not the things that happen to you that cause your distress, but your opinion of it that causes your distress. And a lot of people, find that really hard to believe. Well, this thing happened. It was awful. It's like, no, no, no. It wasn't awful. That was your judgment. I got laid off from my job. It was terrible. No, it wasn't. You just got laid off from your job. Was it good or bad? Who knows? You may go find another job. It may be that job, if you stayed at that, you would have stayed there forever and you would have been bored and you would have died of a heart attack at an early age. But you got laid off, so you had to go find something else, and you found something that you love. It was the beginning of a whole new opportunity. It's our judgments that cause us all that distress. Because if you get laid off and you're like, woohoo, got laid off, I get to go find something else. Was it a bad thing? No. It's our judgments that cause a lot of that. And kind of going back on the emotional intelligence stuff, that knowledge, that ability to frame your perspective and reframe your perspective on thing is incredibly helpful for you to understand and be able to manage your emotions. And the Stoics are very big on emotional management. They're not about not feeling the emotions. They're about managing them properly so that they help you rather than destroy you.
Wow. Makes me think of a quote: if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at begin to change.
Yes.
One of my favorite quotes ever. I don't know which smart person said that, but I think that summarizes, or reflects kind of what you've been saying there. What and it also makes me think of Jocko Willink, Navy SEAL guy. Everyone's heard of him. When he says, anytime any information, good, bad, indifferent, comes at you, good. My tire, I blew a tire on my car, good. My house got broke into last night, good. I what do you call it? Financial identity theft or something like that, good. I lost my job, good. Like, reframe it like, good, okay, awesome, like this opportunity to grow, it's an opportunity to problem solve, opportunity to learn, opportunity to discover new stuff, right? Just again, reframing. That's excellent. That's excellent, excellent, excellent. Okay, what would be a can you give me an example or an idea of a practical what's a practical application of a Stoic philosophy for a high performing team? Like, you're sitting down with a group of executives. What's one exercise that you can walk a group of executives through to start them down this path of learning and applying Stoic principles that will help increase the performance of their team?
Um, well, like I said, the blameless culture is definitely a big part of that, and that's Stoics are big on that. Um, hmm,
But even
Give
but
me a
even that
second.
but even that one, Erick. So let's do that one because that's the one you started off with. How do but okay? So that briefs well, right? Like okay, intellectually, oh yeah, create a blameless culture. That sounds great. How on earth do I do that? Right?
Yeah.
Because it's not like hey, snap my fingers, Erick, stop judging me. Oh, great. Okay, I'm gonna stop judging. Like that's not how it happens, right? So how how do you what's the an exercise that you can do with a team to help them start learning how to have a blameless culture?
Let me think. I mean, the Stoics have a bunch of different exercises, but they're all more kind of personal thing like that. I think for me, let me take a second and think about this. 'Cause this is something I'll definitely need to have if since I'm going into this realm. So, um, I think a lot of it has to do with, I mean, for me, it really always comes back down to control. I think that on most teams that I worked on that I really liked working on was that I was given a lot of autonomy. So because my boss recognized that he couldn't control me, he could instruct me, he could ask, and I could assent to any request, but he never tried to control me, never tried to bully me, and was actually there to help serve me. So one of my favorite managers, I worked for a logistics company out in Minnesota for a number of years, and they put together a new team to work on a bunch of different financial applications. And in our first meeting, one of the first things he said was, he's like, my job is to serve you. I'm here to serve you to make sure you have everything you need so that you can succeed. That is what my job is all about. And so that was a huge thing for me because I didn't feel like that. Whereas in other companies I've been, they were very controlling about things. You know, it's like everything was kind of almost paranoid in a way about, super hyper security about everything. And, are you looking at the internet? Are you doing, and it was just like almost a surveillance state in some ways. And it was very depressing. Whereas other companies like that, um, because they recognized that you didn't need to try and control your team. And so they didn't try to, by letting go of that control and working towards inspiring the team, working towards, hey, how can I make sure that I'm here to support you and that I'm a leader for you, that my job is to serve you. It made it so that we were willing to do so much more because, like I said, because when somebody says, hey, what can I do to help you do your job better? Let me know of anything. If somebody's, if people are making requests from you that are not part of the project scope, let me know and I will talk to them. Do you have the right equipment? If your computer's running slow, let me know and we can upgrade your computer. Just all of those types of things. Um, you need to take time off to go get your kid or whatever. Do what you need to do. Live a good life because that's really important. That that they cared as much about my happiness as their own happiness. I think that was also another part of it, was that they recognized that we were all there to serve a greater purpose, and leading in that sort of manner and not trying to control every aspect of our lives and giving us a lot of autonomy made it so it was really enjoyable. I mean, there were a lot of companies where I worked at where it was really nice because, again, I had so much autonomy. They'd be like, hey, we need a project that does this. Can you come up with a plan? Can you do all this stuff for it? And just let us know when it's going to be done. And I'd be like, okay. And so I would be working on my own projects. I'd be my own project manager. I'd be the one deciding on which technology I was going to use. Just that massive amount of autonomy was really, really important because they weren't trying to control every aspect of the situation. They might have some input on it, and we might have some discussions about the directions we wanted to go. But a lot of it was recognizing and trusting that I knew what I was doing. You hired me, trust me to do my job. So again, trust oftentimes is eroded because don't understand that they can't control their employees. And because they try to control their employees either through intimidation or policies that are ridiculous and um, that cause a lot of stress like that aren't very, very helpful. In fact, the company where I was CTO at, I left that company because there was some conflict with one of the other senior managers, and um, I had employees underneath me who were quitting because of her. And because of that, I would have to do their job. They were my tech support guys. And I would have to do their job for a while I was getting another tech support guy in. And so then that made it so I had less time to actually work on development and making our product move forward. And then she would complain that we were behind schedule. And I'm like, well, I'm behind schedule because I have to do tech support because my guys quit because of you. So that right there was, for me, that was a big lesson in understanding that. And I recognized that I didn't have much control over that situation anymore, which is why I left. And then the senior developer who took over after me was basically kind of running the ship, um, and doing his best. When I hired him, we had an agreement that he would work certain hours and he could leave early to go pick up his kid and then finish up work at home. And it was fine with me. He'd leave it, he'd come in at 9 and he'd leave at 3, and then he'd be online as soon as he picked up his kid and came home. And the new COO who got hired just before I left, um, he came in one day and she had scheduled a meeting last minute at 8:30 and he wasn't there, and she was really upset about that. And he was like, "Well, this is what was going on." And I had to pick up, I dropped my kid off at school and I got here at 9, which I always do. Well, we need you in here by 8. And he's like, "That's not possible." Well, you need to figure something out then. He's like, "When I got hired, that was part of the agreement. So you're going to have to renegotiate that." And she was like, "Are you telling me what so basically it became a power struggle between that." And he's like, "Look, I'm not fighting with you. I'm just telling you this is how it is." And then when he left at 3 that day to go pick up his kid, same kind of thing. The next day, she was all upset about that. And basically, she was trying to control him. And so he finally just reached the point where he's just like, "Look, I'm going to keep doing this because this is what I signed up for. This is when I was hired. This was the agreement we have." She said, "Fine. If you don't come in tomorrow at 8, then don't bother coming in at all." And he's like, "So are you firing me?" She's like, "I guess I am. You're fired." Okay. And at that point, then they were down to one developer because nobody else was there. And the company folded shortly thereafter. Yeah. And so for me, watching examples of that where people try to control other people rather than trusting them and giving them the leeway to do what they need to do, you so mistrust within the company. You don't get that kind of respect. You don't have people who will come to you and be like, "Hey, I need you to come in early just today because we have this thing going on. Is there some way you can work around that? Can you hop on a Zoom meeting?" Whatever it is. There were easy accommodations, but she wasn't willing to do it because it had nothing to do with accommodating him. It was about her asserting her control over him. And he was just like, "Sorry, you can't do that to me. It's not going to work." And so he called me up afterwards because they called me and were like, "Can you come in and help us? Justin's not here anymore." And I'm like, "Why? What happened to Justin?" "Well, he's no longer with the company." And I was like, "Okay, let me think about that." And they were in a real tough spot. And so I called Justin and asked him the story, and he told me, and I was just like, "Wow." And he goes, "Yeah, it's gotten pretty chaotic over there since you left, and it's kind of a it's a dumpster fire at this point." And I said, "It sounds like it." And so I politely declined their offer to do consulting for them just because I didn't want to deal with all the craziness. So it's part of why I left was it was just getting too chaotic there. And my efforts to change the organization in a way that was more positive and more helpful just went unheard. And it was really sad because I've been with the company for a long time. And that was a really hard job to leave because I really liked a lot of the work that I was doing and I'd had a lot of autonomy within that position for quite some time. But you reach a point where you just have to go, "This isn't healthy for me anymore. I have to get out of here."
Yeah, that's great. One thing I share on my podcast a lot is the consequences of low EQ leaders. And
Hmm.
you felt it, right? The organization, right? And eventually it imploded, right? When you have potentially maybe a highly talented person who has a low EQ, and one of the things I say a lot too is you no amount of degrees, certifications, titles, or IQ will trump or compensate for a low EQ. It doesn't matter if you have
Yeah.
a low EQ. I'm telling you, it's gonna have an impact in the entire organization, in the culture. Okay, so here's an exercise. So I'm going to give you an exercise. This is an exercise that I use with a number of my clients, and I'll have them, and this you can do this individually or in a group. I will have them write down all the things at your job that causes you stress, that stresses you out. Just make a list, 1 to 10, 1 to 50, 1 to 5, whatever it is. Write down all the things, and then I also like to have them do, okay, scale of 1 to 10. How much stress does each one of those things cause you? This is a 10, man. This is like, I can't take it another day. Or a 1 is like, it's not a big deal, but it pops a little bit of stress on there. Okay, cool. Just scale 1 to 10, each of those different areas. Okay, now, this is some EQ stuff, so this may be more detailed than other folks would do. But then the other thing that I like to know that's really fascinating, but it's also part of an EQ exercise is now I want you to write down for each one of those areas, what are the emotions that pop for each one of those areas? Because there's going to be a lot of overlap, but some of them are going to be different. And for a lower EQ guy like me, when I started this whole journey, this is very helpful in growing my self awareness, which we talked about earlier. So I'd have them write down the emotions that pop for each of those different areas that cause them stress. There'd be some overlap, but there'd be some differences and some nuances also. And then do a list of all the things at your job that you can control. Write it down. It could be 10 things, it could be 50 things, it could be 100 things, it could be 3 things, whatever. Write down all those things that you have control over. Now, compare the list that you can control to the things that cause you stress, and realize again what percentage, and inevitably, to your point, the majority of stuff that causes people stress, they have zero control over. So now what you have to do is you have to determine, and again, it's a great individual or group exercise. Now you have to determine, and in often cases, this will be the next part of the exercise is what boundaries either do you have or should you have based on the things that are causing you stress. Take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, write that list down, right? Because you may say, "Oh man, this manager is wearing me out," but maybe, okay, I realize I can't control her, but I can live with it. Okay, because I love the work that I'm doing and I love the job and my income or whatever. Okay, cool. Or you may be like, "Oh, here's as long as she doesn't cross this boundary, well, she asked me before she fires anyone on my team." Well, with Jason or Justin, whatever that guy's name was, maybe he was on your team that she fired without you knowing. Okay, now she crossed the line. Now, again, unemotionally, right? Because this was all part of the plan. I'm aware. I've got understood all this stuff. Hey, Susie, thank you for the opportunity to work here. I am, and in the Shark Tank method, right? And for that reason, I'm out, right? Because you crossed this boundary or whatever. So anyway, that's an exercise that I've done with a number of my clients that helps them get that focus. Like, oh, okay, man, I don't have any control over what Erick does or whatever. And then listen, you can still choose to stress about what Erick does or doesn't do, or realize I have no, just like he has no control over you. You've got to determine whether or not. Anyway, so that's a helpful exercise. It's been good for some of my clients. It's been good.
Yeah, I can definitely see that again because a lot of it comes down to, like you said, understanding what you can control and what you can't control. And when you can just let go of the things you can't control and just be like, okay. But I think the boundary point part that you pointed out is also incredibly important. I think a lot of people put up with a lot of stuff because they don't think that they deserve to step up and say, hey, you can't, this is unacceptable. Um, and boundaries are an interesting thing. A lot of people mistake what they are and think, and so I want to kind of dig into that because I think that's super important. And I did a whole episode on that. And boundaries are not ultimatums. They are not a way to make other people change. They are a way for other people to know if you do X, this is going to be my response. That's it. You are simply telling people what you are going to do. You don't tell other people what to do. You say, If you come into my office and you start yelling at me, I'm going to get up and I'm going to leave. If you can come into my office and talk to me in a civil manner, then I'm going to stay. That's it. And it's not about making the other person change. It's just letting them know, if you do this, this will be the response. And it's very simple like that. And I think a lot of people have a hard time with that. They're like, oh, I'm setting a boundary. It's like, no, you're trying to manipulate the other person. You're trying to make them do something because you don't like what they're doing. So you're calling it a boundary, but it's really an ultimatum. It's saying, you better stop doing this or else I'm going to, you know, and the other person may never change. And that's part of the thing about stoicism is there's a lot of acceptance in that. And that's really, really hard for a lot of people, because a lot of people feel like if they just accept reality for what it is, if they just are accepting that all of this shit and accepting of other people and the shit that they do, that they're condoning it. So they feel like they have to resist it. And it's more of just accepting and understanding that you can't control it. So you can either fight against it, which again, there's not much you can do about it, or you can accept it. And part of that acceptance, though, is recognizing when it reaches that point where it's no longer acceptable, where you say, okay, that's my line, and we walk away from it. Because what you're doing is you're deciding what it is you have control over. You can't change that other person, but if they continue to do this thing, what you have control over is to leave this situation, is to quit the company, find another job, whatever it is. And so you are taking control of what you can, and you are letting go of what you can't, which is you can't control the other person, so you let that go.
Love it. Awesome. How can we follow you? How can we find you? What resources do you have if we want to pursue more info from you, Erick, and the whole Stoic philosophy and your great insights?
So my podcast is on all the major platforms. It's called the Stoic Coffee Break. So it's pretty easy to find. You'll see it as a little coffee cup with a wreath around it. Um, my website is stoic.coffee, which I got because that's super easy for people to remember. It was kind of funny how I stumbled on that. I originally called the podcast Stoic Meditations, but there was another one by Massimo Paguglia, who is a Italian philosophy professor, called Stoic Meditation. So I went, okay, well, I'm not going to be competing with this guy because he's out credentialed me like by a long shot. And so when I was looking up, trying to think of different ideas, I was like, okay, what domain names are free? And so I put in Stoic, whatever, and one of them came up, Stoic.coffee, and I thought, that's a great name. I really like that. So I grabbed that, and I grabbed a couple of other ones, but that one really stuck with me. And I was like, well, Stoic Coffee, it's not quite there. And I'm like, a Stoic Coffee Break, because my episodes were all pretty short. And, they're usually, when I started out, they're about 3 to 5 minutes long, and now they're about 10 to 15 minutes long each. But then I do have interviews on there as well, talking with different people that I find interesting. Some have to do with Stoicism, some don't. One time there was this lady who writes on Medium, and she's a romance novel author, but I really liked her articles and her nuance about things. And she's had a pretty rough life, but the way she handles things is in a very stoic manner, and I really appreciated that. It turned out to be a fabulous interview, even though she has nothing to do with stoicism. I find people who are interesting, who are doing interesting things and trying to be better in the world, and try to have conversations with those kind of people. You can also find me on social media. I think my largest following is on Instagram, which is stoic.coffee. Threads is also stoic.coffee. And I think Twitter is just stoic coffee. Although I know it sounds like everybody's abandoning ship on Twitter these days. But I'm also on LinkedIn. You can find me there, Erick Cloward, and Stoic Coffee Break is also listed there as well.
Awesome. Erick, so thankful for you. Thank you for sharing so many great insights. Really grateful that our paths cross. And again, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. It was really great chatting with you about this. I definitely learned some things today, and some things I want to take back into my practices. So I think that's something that's always important to me, is to be a consummate learner.